Hey there, I'm Stan Baker, and I'm one of your hosts for the podcast Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. And this episode, we're going to be talking about how to deal with upset parents, because there certainly seem to be a lot of them. Now, Shelley, Steve, and I have dealt with a lot of parents in our careers and a lot of upset parents. What I found interesting in our conversation is how many small and little, seemingly insignificant kinds of things can make a huge difference in the conversations that we have with parents who are upset. And I think learning and understanding more about how to deal with upset parents is really important, because we want, as school leaders, to be working with parents, not doing things to them or for them. If you're currently dealing with upset parents, and who isn't nowadays, then this episode is for you. It has a few simple steps of things that you can do to deal with and work with upset parents. Some of the main things we talk about are things like sitting in a circle or around a circular table. Acknowledge the parent and their concern. Use the conversation to set the stage for a relationship, because you will be dealing with them again, likely. At the end of the episode, you can visit our website, www.restorative.ca or www.circleforum.ca, and make sure that you subscribe on YouTube, Circle Forum. Now let's head over to the conversation with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. Okay, so let's just get right into it. We have a lot of upset parents in schools right now, more than we've seen in a long time. What's really the problem here?
I'm trying to figure out what the problem is. And I think parents are upset for a whole lot of reasons, not the least of which is COVID and restrictions and mask mandates and all that stuff. Dealing with upset parents has always been there.
That's
And,
not new.
and that's not new. And how we deal with it isn't new either. It's just the reasons that they're upset. And maybe the frequency is a bit more now. Maybe there's more of a lineup at the door than there used to be. But how you deal with an upset parent who's angry over a mask mandate versus 10 years ago, where a parent might be upset about a B on an assignment rather than they think the kid should get an A. Upset is upset. And how you deal
Yeah.
with them and the approaches of dealing with them really haven't changed much. It's just we're dealing with a different reason for that upset.
So we've never tracked this, but I wonder if there are more upset parents, or we have school staff under such strain as well that it feels like that. And of course, we don't have any numbers to show that, but we know there's always been parents that are upset about things. When you're working with people, that happens.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's happened, certainly with COVID, is that as schools have been locked down and kids have had to learn remotely, as schools, we've put more onto parents. And suddenly they're realizing, oh my goodness, I didn't realize this was all the stuff teachers had to do. And part of, I think, what's happening is that because of COVID, parents have been responsible for more of their child's education than they ever were previously. And I think you're right, Shelley. Everybody is more stressed. Everybody at school is more stressed. Everybody in the community is more stressed. Everybody just wants to get back to not having to wear masks, not having to do social, not having to do cohorts. And in the middle of all this, we've got all learning and attendance, and wow.
Yeah. And you're right. I think COVID has a lot to do with it. And think back to the last 3 months I was in a school. The biggest issue that we dealt with, and I say we, the principal of the school and myself, who's the acting VP, the biggest issue we dealt with that just commanded so much of her time and my time and the superintendent's time was an angry parent who used emails and Facebook as her way of reaching out. And of course, with Facebook, it gets out there now. Other people chime in and they all have the reasons, but it had nothing to do with marks. It had to do with extracurricular activities and the lack of extracurricular activities. And the premier says that you should be doing extracurricular activities again. Why aren't your teachers doing it? And as a school leader, it's all your fault that your teachers aren't coaching teams. And this went on and on for months. And every time we would send something out, say, hey, we're starting a girls basketball team, we would get this thing that, yeah, but they only have 2 games. That's not good enough. And so it was just never ending focus. And this was an irate parent who just thought the school wasn't pulling their weight. And it was all to the detriment of her child and the children in the school. And then it just became, it's always been that way at that school. And you're not the first principal that was failed to serve the kids really well. And it just went crazy from there. But it had nothing to do with academics or maths or anything. It just had to do with
Yeah.
extracurricular activities. And I think what compounded it was, of course, the social media and the use of Facebook, because other parents got involved in it and say, hey, yeah, you're right. I never thought about it. And all of a sudden they're angry too. And it never really got resolved because the answer that was given, the parent didn't like. And so kept on. I mean, we said, this is the answer. You just don't like it. And she continued to be angry and rally more people. And we just kept giving the same answer till eventually it died away. But of course, it was the end of June. It pretty well had to die away. But where do you go from there? And so what said earlier, it's not the reason for anger, it's how we deal with anger. At some point in time, whether you deal with it in a more of an authoritarian manner or a restorative manner, at some point you get to that here's the expectation. Let me explain it to you. Here's what it's going to be. And then it's up to that person to accept it or not. And this person just didn't want to accept it. But so we went through that sort of fair process piece as much as we could. They just didn't like the answer.
And when you're intellectually, you knew what was happening on Facebook and you knew why the responses were coming and that there really wasn't going to be a resolution to this. You keep trying to work at it and there's still no resolution, but it becomes very personal or it feels like an attack, even though intellectually there's not going to be a solution for this person. When it keeps coming like that becomes very difficult to deal with at times.
So how does restorative leadership address this? I think you got at some of it, but what should we be doing as restorative leaders to address persistently upset parents who feel we're not meeting their expectations?
I would rather have an
Face-to-face.
meeting than a phone call. And so one of the things I always espoused was bring them in. I don't care how angry they are and whether you're nervous or whether you want to face the person. You got to bring them in and have them sit in the office. And they might bring a spouse or they might bring a friend. And you could have your vice principal there, or if they're angry at a teacher, you could be there as the administrator. But sitting around a table is step one. And when we talk about restorative practices, and we know that you have to sit in the room together, and whether you're around sitting across from each other at a table or sitting in a circle, or even as I always said in my office, I had a round table. So we always sat in a circle, but we had a table. That's step one is you got to face the person and the communication through body language and eye contact, all that stuff is there that isn't there in a phone call and definitely isn't there in an email and certainly not there in social media. Step one is bring them in if you can.
Yes, it adds there's a whole different thing that happens, right? What people can say through writing is very unfiltered at times. It's very difficult to say those things face to somebody. And then that's been escalated through social media or email. But when you're sitting face to face with somebody, there's a whole different thing that happens and some expectations of how we're going to behave here as well. But generally people can't respond the same way when they're having to say that to somebody's face. This is what we tell the kids and the students. And it's the same with adults as well.
Now, Steve, did that parent that you just talked about in the story who was upset about the extracurricular sports, did you ever have that person into the office? And if you did, how did it go?
She would not come in. She refused to meet, and to a point where she wouldn't even talk on the phone. And she would put in her neck her emails. Don't even bother calling me because I won't speak to you. I'll only speak to the superintendent. It got to that point where because she didn't like the answers that we were giving, she went to the superintendent, and the superintendent got on the phone and gave her the exact same answer. And at a certain point, you can only go so high. And she didn't like the superintendent's answer either, which is the same as our answer. It was extracurriculars are a voluntary thing, and the answer. But and then I was going to say earlier, then it became personal. First, it was you're not doing this, and you need to do it, and you're not a very good administrator. Then it became a personal attack on the administrator for what a terrible principal she was, for a whole lot of other things that came out of the blue. And it had nothing to do with extracurriculars at this point. It was about graduation parties from the year before, and you didn't do a track meet, and all these other things that this principal had not done just to show how to. And teachers don't even want to teach at your school because they don't like you. It just went on. So it became a very personal attack because she didn't win the original argument. So now she was venting and it became a personal attack. And it was all on email, which she would then copy it to everybody else. And she didn't do blind carbon cut. You could see who else got it. So we all knew who was getting this email. The trustee got a copy of it and the superintendent, everybody else. And how do you respond to that? And I said, you don't respond. At a certain point, you don't respond because what are you really trying to prove at that point? You're just defending yourself against an unreasonable attack. So I said,
So,
just don't respond.
so one of the things that comes up in my mind when you're talking is that this attacking others
Yeah.
sounds very much like something
Yeah.
from the compass of shame.
Yeah.
That's one of the, and so I'm wondering what do you think the need was or the shame response? Because imagine that it is a shame response. What kinds of things could we do as restorative leaders?
Yeah, in this instance, I think the shame response was when it became personal and the subsequent attacks because she didn't win her original argument. And there was a lot of parents upset there were extracurriculars going on. I mean, that's no secret, right? Everybody wants the kids to be doing all these things, and they're upset that there weren't end of the year parties and field trips and all those things. Parents are upset about that. But when the answer is finally given with a full explanation, and because she shared it with everybody, they all know the answer, and she didn't win. Then it became, I got to win somewhere. So then
That's
there's
right.
almost this feeling of shame that I brought this forward and I didn't win. And
Yes.
so I'm going to keep attacking somewhere. I got to win somewhere on this so that I can.
I need to save face with these
Got to save some
parent
face.
group. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was really, in this case, I think the shame aspect was there with all these subsequent attacks.
So I think it's interesting then that as a restorative leader, there are some times where you stop talking. It's initially you want to invite people in and you want to be invitational, and you have to be okay with somebody saying no to your invitation.
And we know that to be true in restorative practice at all levels, whether it's a formal conference or whatever. If people refuse to participate, you can't do it. And got two parties. And I did one about 6 months ago where both parties were angry with each other, neighbors over an issue. And when we tried to bring them together, one side said, no, I won't meet with them. And so
No.
we couldn't have a mediation or a restorative mediation in that because I'm angry, but I'm not going to meet with the guy for all sorts of reasons. So we couldn't do it. We just never went forward. So it's the same. It's the same with parents. You can invite them in. If they refuse to come, you say, well, okay, I tried. At a certain point, you have to say, we've done all we can do and just let them stew. So the vast majority of upset parents don't go to that extreme.
No.
That's an extreme, so almost a one-off, if you will, although there's some, every principal could probably name one that sort of goes on and on. But for the most part, or 2 or 3, yeah. But for the most part, parents get upset for a lot of reasons at teachers, and maybe it's about marks or homework or poor communication seems to be a big one these days. No matter how much you communicate, it's never enough. And so they get angry with the teachers and they might fire off an email or they might phone the teacher and say something really, and the teacher's upset. How do I deal with it? Let's have them in and I'll sit with you and let's bring them in and the parents come in. And so you go through you hear them out. Obviously the thing with restorative, we've got to listen, ask them questions, tell me what's happening. And then you sit back and you listen. And they may vent. They may have already gotten over the venting piece and now they just want to come to a solution. But they may vent for a while. Okay, what can we do about this? So then you start to work towards that solution piece. I hear what you're saying. So what is it you need to make you feel better?
And that kind of conversations helps you see things through a different lens as well. There may be other pieces that you don't have any idea what's going on, or they've had previous experiences or whatever that is. So that can shift the conversation quickly.
It was interesting. I was talking with a group of principals earlier this week, and they were really concerned about exactly this, the fact that parents get upset, but also their potential to become very defensive. And even just in a simple conversation, there were 5 people involved in the conversation that we had set up just as a role play. And the first 3 were not from the school. And so they said, like, the school didn't get a voice in all of this. Got to go all the way around the circle for one. And don't take the hooks and the barbs and those jabs and those buttons that are pushed. Don't respond to those kinds of things. but I want to say something. I want to jump in there and correct them. And what I kept saying, and this is one aspect I think of restorative leadership, is let someone speak right to the very end. You'll get a chance to speak. You don't have to make it an argument. It's one person speaking and the other people are listening. And I think just even if, and we talk about this all the time, right? People are happier if people in authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. And part of with them is just listening. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to say you're right, you're wrong. You don't have to persuade them. You just have to listen.
And when we get defensive, what we tend to do, other than telling somebody to calm down, and we know how well that works, we tend to repeat expectations as if they don't know them. We tend to dismiss their concerns, whether they're valid or not, or we start to go through a laundry list of things maybe their child has not done right, or they've done. So we go to these defaults and talk about escalating a situation, because children and adults know what the expectations are of the school. They know what their kids have been up to or not up to. They don't need to hear that in that moment. So you're going to absolutely add fuel to what's happening there. So that's why the listening part that you're talking about, Stan, and not just being ready to fire back with, because that's where we're comfortable. We can do that like very quickly. We can name off some of these things, but it's not going to help with an upset parent for sure.
No, it reminds me of giving my son a driving lesson as we were coming into the intersection. I said, calm down and take it easy.
As you're racing.
And as we're through the intersection, he pulled over and stopped and he said, actually would help if you calm down first, Dad. Okay.
Yeah, this whole co-regulation thing, I pick up your energy.
Yeah.
But we're tying in cheek here, but you bring up a point, and when you ask the question, what doesn't work? And that falls into what doesn't work.
That's right.
I have seen adults in a conversation, whether it's teachers with a parent or an administrator with a teacher, even not say you need to calm down, but if you keep yelling, we're not going to carry on this conversation.
Wow.
And that's okay. But when they yell back at them and they're trying to out yell the person, that's not helping. One thing I know that absolutely doesn't work, and I watched this in action as a vice principal years ago with a principal who was my mentor, I guess I'll say.
Oh, I can hardly wait to hear this story now.
And quite often when parents are angry, they just come into the office. I need to talk to the principal. I need to talk to
who's in charge.
I want a person in charge. I need to talk to the principal. And you could see them across the office and they could see the principal standing there and she'd say, tell them to make an appointment. I'm busy. And the steam became flames at that point. What do you mean you're busy? I could see you standing there. I'm busy. You'll have to make an appointment and come back later. And talk about setting parents off, like just right up, they're already angry. And all you've done is make them angry because you want to control.
Yes.
It's all about, in that instance, that was about control. And I remember standing there watching this going, oh, this is not going to end well at all. And quite often they will come in and you are busy. And so I got a million things to do. So go for it. Explain to them, look, I just got to go. I have to make announcements or I have to go see somebody in a classroom. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Do you mind waiting? Because as irate or as angry as they may be, they still understand that when you just walk in the office, you can't just go right in and get the audience immediately. But if you explain to them, I'll be back in 5 minutes and you're back in 4.5, not 10, then it's okay. You come in the office and you start the process. So yeah, having them make appointments or making them wait or having them jump through some kind of a hoop just because you want to show them that you're in charge. And then I want a phone. Now I've had people call out. I demand a phone call before 4:00 today. That may not happen. And so I'll call it 4:30. I said, geez, I really wanted to call, but I was in a meeting or whatever, but I still called you back. Sometimes they make unreasonable demands, but certainly making them jump through hoops to control isn't the issue. Because honestly, if they're angry, they're controlling the process there. You just sit back.
Right.
I mean, by sitting back and listening, you are in control.
Yes.
It actually reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever had it walking into a very busy dentist's office or doctor's office or anybody who's serving behind a counter. And the person is obviously really busy. They're dealing with somebody on the phone. They got somebody on something on the computer. They've been asked something from a colleague. And the best people look at you, make some eye contact,
Yes.
and say, "Can I help you?" And or they'll say, "Hi there. I'll be with you in just a moment."
Yes, it's that acknowledgement.
You have to at least
Exactly.
acknowledge the person.
So there's an example, a simple thing that somebody can do as a restorative leader. You can simply acknowledge the person. And I think in the conversation, a second thing would be to acknowledge their concern.
Yes.
Validate. Any other thoughts, simple suggestions for restorative leadership dealing with upset parents?
The simple, and we mentioned it already, but it was understanding the compass of shame, because once you do understand that, then it's going to feel less personal. You're going to understand that this is coming from somewhere else and that it's not directly about you. You may have a piece of it, but the level of anger that's there is also being pushed on with something else too. So that helps you take a step back and have a better conversation.
And something I always tried to leave every meeting with parents, whether the meeting went well or not, was if this happens again or the next time, because we know it will, just give me a call or just pop in and see me. Sort of set that stage for the next time if there's an issue, rather than you feel like saying, don't email the world. You don't have to call the Ministry of
Right.
Education. You don't have to call my boss. You don't
The press.
just come on in and we'll talk. And
Yeah.
the thing with that is that at that point in time, if things have gone reasonably well and you've listened and you arrived at a certain point where everybody's happy, they'll probably do that anyway,
Yes.
because you've shown them that there's a process for dealing with their upset or their
So
issues.
you've shown them respect too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you're setting the stage for the next time. And in any small community, but any school community, because of social media, how you deal with that parent, everybody else is going to find out too. Tell you what, just go in and see the guy. He's great, or she'll listen to you. And we resolve it in no time. But you don't have to fire off angry emails to the world. And so over a while, over time, the reputation of how you deal with things gets out there. And so it does the anger is not going to go away, but dealing with it's going to get easier for you because people will not blow up as much because they know you're at least going to listen. And
But
there's still issues. There's still going to be tough issues, but at least they know how you deal with them and you set the stage.
what I love in what you've said there, Steve, is that really, as a restorative leader, you do need to focus on the relationship of every parent that comes in. And so when you're dealing with the upset parent, focus on the relationship that you have with them now, but also the next time you have to see them.
I recall a time is how to deal with parents and how not to deal with parents. And it all happened in one meeting, which is amazing. That it was a principal I worked for, and she had the reputation of being pretty doing to people, not working with people in that authoritarian manner. Anyways, he had suspended this student for 5 days for bringing a replica gun to school. And he was in grade 1 and it was Halloween and he was dressed as a cowboy. And the parents thought this was silly. And so they went to the superintendent to say, what's going on here? And the superintendent thought, maybe we can come to an agreement on this 5 days. There's some middle ground. So it ended up, a meeting was called. The parents came in and I sat in there with the principal and the superintendent. We went around the table and finally a solution was proposed that he's been gone 1 day. We're halfway through day 2. Why doesn't he come back tomorrow? So that would be day 3 and he'll work in the office like an in-school suspension and then go back to class day 4 and 5. He's in grade 1 after all. And parents thought, okay, that's reasonable. Like, we don't think he should have gotten the 5 days in the first place. We're already a day and a half in, but essentially we're cutting it off after 2 days and he can come back to school. And so they're quite happy with that. And the superintendent said, great, we've come to a solution. The whole time the principal hasn't said a word. And just as we're all just out of our chairs standing up to shake hands to leave, she said, oh, and one more thing. I just want to let you know that your son won't listen to me. I keep telling him he needs to go to his proper exit door and he's not. He's going out the front door of the school. And that needs to stop or there will be consequences. And we all just sat down and the father looked at her and said, are you kidding me? And the mother said, I'll talk to him. And we got up and left. They got up and left. The problem with that, of course, is they left the office angry. Instead of leaving the office somewhat satisfied that we come to a conclusion about this 5-day suspension. Now they've left the office angry. Yeah, their son came back to school the next day, but they're still angry with her. How are they going to deal with that principal the next time there's an issue? What's going to be their way? They're going to go right to the superintendent. They're not going to bother to deal with her. So it's a combination of, we came to a great restorative solution over one problem, but then what not to do. Let's butt heads and let's leave it because I can't lose. I can't lose the argument. It still sticks out in my mind, even though it was well over 20 years ago that happened, because it just showed two different faces all in one meeting of this person. And she still to her this day probably thinks she was right in bringing that up, because this is all about a little boy who wasn't disciplined and she needed to help discipline him. Whatever. So the superintendent was quite taken aback by that. We had a chat about it afterwards as well. And I don't know where the principal is these days. She retired at the end of that year, but I still think of that issue of that, how we negotiate a very restorative solution and then just built another whole problem out of it.
So you said butt heads. Is that the action or the name of the person?
It depends on who you talk to. Yes, it's a butting heads versus a butt head. You're right. But it isn't. We think about butting heads all the time is, how can I just continue an argument and just argue and argue? I mean, I know some people love to argue. And parents.
No, we don't. No, we don't, Steve.
It's about having
we
the
don't.
last word.
Yeah, I don't want the last word. Shelley, you want the last word,
No.
don't you? Because that
No,
should wrap
no.
it up.
Okay, fine.
I loved Steve's story about how one meeting illustrated and demonstrated both restorative leadership and the lack of restorative leadership. We can learn a lot from noticing what others are doing in leadership in schools. Want to learn more about restorative practice and restorative leadership? Check out our website, www.restorative.ca. Send me an email to stan@restorative.ca. And let's keep listening to our parents.